The Python Show.
Hello and welcome to the Python Show with Mike Driscoll. And today I have a special guest, Tarek. Now, Tarek is a friend of mine that I've known for quite a while, and you might know him because he is one of the creators, or I believe the creator of Flake 8, a Python linter. I believe he works for Elastic, and I'm just going to let him take it away and just tell us a little bit about himself.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Mike, and hello everyone. So yeah, I've been around the Python community for a while, and I'm really glad that we have the opportunity to talk a little bit. That's really nice. And
Mhm.
yeah, so I work at Elastic. Prior to that, I was working at Mozilla, where I did a
Mhm.
bunch of Python. And yeah, so I created Flake originally, and I brag all the time about it. Hey, yeah, I created Flake, but the reality is that I was just the initial creator, and then a bunch of other people took over the maintenance. But
Mhm.
I think the original idea I had was something that really took off. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious just because you mentioned it, but what does Mozilla use Python for? If you can elaborate.
Uh, what do
What did
I?
Moz- what
Oh,
does
Mozilla. Yeah. Okay.
Mozilla
Okay.
use it? Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, um, like, just trying to recollect my memory. So yeah. I was hired at Mozilla right before Firefox 4 came out.
Hmm.
So that was a while ago. Before they got crazy with the numbering. Like
Yeah.
back then, we didn't have a train release, and we were basically shipping the new version when it was ready. And
Hmm.
Firefox 4 was a big deal. And back then, um, Mozilla was not really into web services and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
they had a few websites, and they started to do a lot of stuff around Django. They built, for example, the MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network website, and
Hmm.
the add-ons website using Django. And
Cool.
they started to get a lot of interest into Python, and they started to implement web services. One of them was Firefox Sync, which is
Mm.
the small web service that gets used when you want to sync bookmarks across
Hmm.
your devices. We were ahead of Chrome back then, of Google, sorry, back then, because, like, for example, back in those days, they didn't encrypt your data. They were storing everything in clear on their side,
Hmm.
and we really cared about privacy. So in Firefox Sync, everything is encrypted on the client side, and everything that's stored on the server side is fully encrypted. So because
Hmm.
we care a lot about privacy at Mozilla.
That's
And
awesome.
so back to why I joined, they had this little PHP service to do this on the top of MySQL, and they were like, oh, maybe we should move to Python for this kind of service,
Hmm.
because the way we deployed back then the services and stuff like that, it made a lot of sense to move from PHP to Python.
Yeah.
So they looked for a Python expert, and I was like, hey, yeah, let's do this. So I was hired. I worked on that service, and I had the opportunity to set up good practice at Mozilla around Python. And well, now fast forward, most people do Python, so it's. But back then, it was a big deal for Mozilla.
Yeah.
I was the Python guy for the web services there. So yeah, that's how uh, Python got started at Mozilla around web services and stuff like that.
That's cool. So you're kind of the Python godfather at Mozilla originally then.
Yeah, kind of, and then they hired a lot of talents. So now, I mean,
Hmm.
like in most companies, it's not like exotic stuff to be a Python developer anymore, I guess. But
Yeah.
back then, the like in the Silicon Valley, it was mostly PHP, Ruby on Rails. Ruby was
Hmm.
the tool startup used to build some features, and you can tell still today, like a big apps like GitHub or some other big apps like that are like Ruby apps. So,
Huh. Interesting. I didn't know that. So,
but
one of no, go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say it's been really a chance for me to be there during that era, because I could see Python growing into big like bigger company like this,
Yeah.
and I witnessed how the tone changed when people started to talk about Python. At back in the old days, it was really like, yeah, the little scripting language you can use on the side to do some like experiment or whatever. And then if
Hmm.
you're serious, if you want to do enterprise search, you have to do Java. If you want to do the web, it's PHP. And I was really there when I saw people like changing their impression about Python, I guess.
Yeah. Cool. I just wanted to ask how you got into programming in the first place. Was that like your first thing you wanted to do for your life journey, or did
Oh,
you just kind of
so
fall into it, or how did that happen?
yeah. So my mother is she's retired now, a computer science teacher,
Hmm.
and uh, so I'm old enough that I started to poke at computers before internet, So
Hmm.
I'm 46. So when I was kid, my mother one day brought home this little sharp computer. I
Yeah.
still have it. I kept it. It's in my closet. But basically, it looks like a giant calculator,
Hmm.
and it was the first time we had the ability to do programming, to print stuff directly on the computer. So we
Hmm.
built like those fractal things you can build with some algorithm. So
Yeah.
we played with that, and I was like amazed by this. So this is where I get my passion from, software programming. This little sharp device,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
as I got older, I just loved programming. So after high school, I went to a computer science thing at the university in France, and yeah, since then, I mean, I was not really good at school in high school, but when I went into the university to do some programming, I was so obsessed with it. I got
Hmm.
good at it because I was like, I spent all my evenings doing programming. So yeah,
Yeah.
it became a kind of an obsession, and yeah, like it still is. I haven't lost that spark when I open VM and start to do some coding. So
Yeah. I totally get it. I mean, when I started, I was like, "This is really hard. I don't really understand these abstract concepts." And then I think it was about 2 years in. I'm like, if I don't start getting this soon, I don't know. I might have to switch degrees. And then it all started to click, and I'm like,
yeah,
I finally get it now. This is awesome.
yeah, and it's this is the worst job if you don't like programming. It's like a punishment. Like I see
Mm,
some people in the that are programmers, and like I see they don't have that passion and they hate it. Those
yeah.
people end up being like project managers or like team leads or whatever, and
Hmm.
because you can't do coding for 20 years if you don't have that passion for coding,
Yeah.
and it's very specific. Like the college where I went to, the university where I went to, I became a teacher there like 10 years after, like to
Hmm.
provide some courses. Like they used to do that, like hire professional to do like 2 hours per week with folks.
Hmm.
and interacting with the kids, you know already which one will like be programmers and which one will go to other direction,
Yep.
just by talking about the code and the passion they have around the code. Because yeah, it's I think it's important to have that passion.
I totally agree. Yeah, I have plenty of coworkers I had over the years, and some are like they're just not in it, and some are so passionate they don't even time has no meaning for them. They get into the zone and they stay in the zone, and
Yeah, and this is especially true for people from the Python community. Like if you work for big companies, at some point in my career, I was working with like large government teams in Paris,
hmm
and uh, some people like the specific stuff about Python. It attracts people that are really passionate about coding. You will
hmm
find interesting people in that community. People like that used, for example, to be a philosophy teacher at the university and started
hmm
a side gig in programming. You'll find like artists that have like a musician background and stuff like that. There is
yeah,
I feel like the Python community attracts people that have a passion for coding without necessarily being into the usual path of yeah, I was in college, I did this, that, became an
yeah.
engineer. See what I mean?
Oh yeah, yeah. My my brother went and got a psychology degree, and now he's a network engineer, and he's starting to learn Python. And I'm like, I told you you should have started with Python at the beginning, but he didn't listen. So,
Yeah, yeah, and this is what I really enjoyed when I was going to Python PyCons conferences or Plone conferences. Like
hmm
you get to meet like super interesting people that build
yeah,
crazy stuff with Python, which is really cool.
it is super cool. Speaking of which, how did you end up choosing Python? Because I'm sure you didn't get taught Python in university. So how did you get into it?
Right. So yeah, back in my days, everything was C++ and Java in the university, and so what happened is that
hmm
my first job was using Delphi, or do you say Delphi in English? It's from
I don't know.
Borland.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't know anyone who actually uses it.
Okay, so basically it's MVC that is based on Pascal. Like
hmm
it's a variation of the Pascal language with OOP and stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I love it. It's really cool. And my first job was building a software for retailers, like to manage
hmm
stocks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like for like companies that are like Walmart or whatever, like the
hmm
French version. And at some point, when you use this programming, they had something called VCLs. It was components to extend how you work with your program. For example, if you wanted to do some networking, you would use a network component built by another company and you would buy it. And I got
Okay.
super frustrated because we had bugs in some of them, and the company that built them was not really responsive, and they asked us for money to fix the bugs and stuff like that. And
Mm,
one day I found a collection of components that were called indie components. And I started to look at this, and it was open source. And this was my first contact with open source. Oh
okay.
wow! I can like actually dig into the code, find out what's going on, etc. And it's not something that is held by a company. It's a community of people. Wow, that's amazing! I can like interact with
hmm
folks and build some code with them, and it completely blew my mind. So I wanted to do open
Yeah.
source. So I looked at what existed out there, and I wanted to build something or like to have fun in projects with people
hmm
where it was not only about the money. It was about building stuff together in a creative way. And
Yeah.
I found Zope,
Mhm.
uh, and I started to build some stuff with Zope, and I loved it. And Zope is in Python. This is
Yeah.
basically where I started to do some real stuff with Python. And I created the Python user group in France. So
Cool.
I created a website around this technology because I loved it. Some people started to join my. It was like a BB forum, a PHP BB forum,
Mhm.
and I told them, "Well, we should meet. We should do a user group." And we all met in Paris, and we created the French Python user group, the FP. And
Yep.
I was president of that group, that user group for 10 years. And yeah, this is how I came into the Python world.
That's cool. It kind of reminds me a little bit of my own journey because I there wasn't any Python groups here in Iowa either, and so I ended up starting one because I'm like I want to meet more people who use Python and just talk about it with other people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, exactly. I think you and I have like a little bit of a similar path in the
Hmm.
community, like trying to meet more people, organize some stuff with groups, and try to yeah. So that's really cool.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, I really like Flake8, but I'd like to know if you could just tell me a little bit about its history. How did it come about?
Right. So um, when I worked with some Python project, I wanted to have some quality like everyone. And back then, we had a few tools available. We had PyFlake, we
Yep.
had Pep8, we had Pilot,
Hmm.
and I had this makefile where I had the three of them, and I had different commands. I was like super frustrated by the overhead of having to call several tools to basically lint and fix my project.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, maybe I could write a single command line that drives them all. And
Yep.
this is how I created the Flake8. I was like, yeah, I want one single command line, and I don't want to be bothered about the details of the option I need to pass to PyFlake, the option I need to pass to Pep8 or
Hmm.
whatever. And back then, I also wanted to use MacCab, which is a stuff to
Hmm.
calculate the complexity. This is why you have it built in Flake8. And the first version of Flake8 I released was basically this idea: you just run one command, and it does everything
Yep.
for you. It's not like a crazy idea or like a very innovative, but
Hmm.
the fact that the community back then had so many different tools, it took off because people were like, "Yeah, I don't want to worry about
Yeah.
that crazy complex Pylint configuration file or whatever. I just want to make sure that what I do with my project meets the standards the Python community use.
Hmm.
So I'll just use Flake8 because if I use it, uh, I'm kind of guaranteed that what I do is what people do out there most of the time. A little bit like what Black is doing for formatting.
Hmm.
Why bother doing that yourself when a tool can automate it? So
Yeah.
yeah, and so I made it pluggable and worked a little bit to push it. And at some point, it took off, and I was busy on other projects, so I gave the maintenance over to other folks, and
Hmm.
it really took off with the work other folks did on it. Like so now I'm just the guy bragging that I'm the original author, but 95% of the work done there was done by the other folks.
Do you still contribute to it at all, or do you just leave it to the other people now?
So that's interesting. So basically, I wanted to contribute back at some point, and uh, I discovered another tool called Rough,
Hmm.
which is a tool written in Rust
Yep.
that basically does everything Flake8 does
Mm-hmm.
much faster, better. So basically, now I'm just like, yeah, okay, well, Flake8 was nice, but I think people should use Rough. So if I were to contribute to something, I would contribute to Rough.
Okay.
I know that
That's fair.
the guy implemented also, he wants to implement a black support directly in Rough, which
Mm-hmm.
again, uh, is aligned with my vision of having a single tool for all these things.
Yep.
And ultimately, I just want to call rough and you're done. The other project I have in mind that is very similar to that concept is Perf 8.
Okay.
So I started a project called Perf 8 at Elastic where I want to be able to do uh, performance reports on your code using a
Mm.
single command line. So it includes cprofile, of course. It
Yep.
includes PySpy. It includes memory. I'm using psutil to do some report about CPU memory usage and stuff like that.
Mm.
And the whole stuff creates a single report, unified report. It's pluggable, same ID than Flake8.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I called it Perfect. And we use that at Elastic in the CI to produce performance report when you run our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know if that's going to be used by the community. I have no idea,
Hmm.
but it's around the same idea. I don't want to bother about picking the right tools. I want to run a report about the
Yeah.
performances, and I want it to be a no-brainer. So the tool will instrument you do perfect and the script, and it runs and the
Mm-hmm.
script exactly like if you in the bash, if you would call, I don't know, nice space your script is going to run it,
Mm-hmm.
same ID, and then
Huh.
it generates a report.
Does it output different types of reports like PDF, HTML,
So right now it
etc.?
just generates a single file HTML report,
Okay.
and I don't know if for the podcast you have links that you provide to people listening, but
I do.
okay, cool. So we can put some links there so I can show what kind of report it generates. It generates CSV files
Okay.
and a single HTML file that embeds everything, and you have like a nice UI where you can click and see all the graphs, and generate the graphs using Matplotlib,
Okay.
which is fairly standard.
Yep.
And that's it. Like it doesn't do any diff with previous rounds. It doesn't do anything fancy. It just
Mm-hmm.
spits out interesting data about what happens when you run code. And for us, for Elastic, it's super useful. For example, there is one report about the event loop to know if your code blocks the event loop. So let's say, for example,
Okay.
you have this cool event loop based project. It's fully async, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have one developer that creates that function that blocks everything, and everything gets slow because you have a loop that's not async and grabs the event loop for a while. So how do you detect this? So there is a
Mm-hmm.
report that shows you that the lag of the event loop grows, and we can detect that, this kind of
Wow.
stuff.
That sounds really cool. I mean, that's definitely something I'm going to go check out after this. I want to go play with that tool.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you know what? I'd love contributors, and I think it can be really useful for some project. For like the other part where it's useful for us, we've built a framework to a pluggable framework to ingest data into Elasticsearch. So you can write your
Mm-hmm.
own little connectors, like say, for example, if you have MySQL and you want to grab some data from MySQL to Elasticsearch. So we provide a framework for this. Everything is pretty nice, but it's easy for us to have someone creating a connector that's going to blow the memory, like
Hmm.
by doing some I don't know, like if you have like some caching or whatever, and you start to pull a lot of data, you can go crazy in memory. You can like kill a server really easily.
Yeah.
So with Perfect, I have this nightly test that exercise your connector, and
Hmm.
Perfect will detect if you go past a certain threshold of RAM usage, and
Okay.
if it detects it, it's going to tell you, well, sorry, you went over, I don't know, 300 megabyte in RSS. You should check what's happening. And then you
Yeah.
go to the report and you get the memory report where you can dive in into your app and see where the memory used is used to fix
Hmm.
it.
That sounds really helpful. Cool. I haven't really used memory very much yet. That's also on my to-do list.
Memory,
Yeah.
yeah, for us it's pretty important because in the app I'm building today, it's mostly IO bound services that there is a lot of data transiting, and
Hmm.
the cost is about the RAM. Like so, if you
Okay.
can limit your RAM usage, it's cheaper. I guess it's more efficient. So it's all about making sure that you use the less RAM possible when you grab data somewhere and send it somewhere else.
Hmm. Is that something you think is easy to do in Python, or is that more difficult than like other languages? Or do you know?
Well, it's a little bit more difficult in Python because in Python, as opposed to C or C++, you can't really infer the size of objects from the
Hmm.
interpreter because it's a hidden word. Like if you do a sys get size of an object, you don't get the real size.
Yeah.
But there are tools out there that provide this kind of feature, and I've included a lib in Perfect to do that. And so basically,
Okay.
uh, it can like find out the real heap size, the real size of your object in the Python heap,
Mhm.
and tell you that.
Cool. So we've talked about rough and perfect and black a little bit. Are there any other tools you consider to be essential when working with Python code?
um, well,
Like,
for QA, I think that's it. For building apps, I think it's interesting um, to see what people doing are doing with the async programming.
hmm.
And I think at this point, if you start to build an app, it should be async. It should be a no-brainer to build it in an async fashion. Um,
Okay.
um,
Do you
Other than that,
recommend
yeah, sorry.
do you recommend the Python async library, or are you talking about one of the third-party libraries?
Well, the async IO lib in Python is pretty mature at this point. You can do a bunch of stuff
Hmm.
with it. When you have to build web services and stuff like that, you can use like AIO HTTP. That's what I use.
Yep.
And there are like higher level frameworks that are available in the community, but I don't have like a strong preference. Most of the time, I use plain AIO HTTP. Like it's
Yeah.
sufficient for what I do, both on the client side and on the server side.
That makes
Um,
sense.
there is a fast API. I know it's very popular right now,
Hmm.
uh, but it for me it opened cans of worms, which is type annotation. I'm a little bit nervous
Mm.
about this because every time I see a Python app with a bunch of type annotation, I don't see Python anymore. I see a different language, and that makes me nervous. That makes me really
Yeah.
nervous. And I know it's useful. I know a lot of people love it. Um, I don't know. I feel like when I see a Python module filled with annotation, I'm like, okay, guys, maybe you should write Rust directly. why bother writing Python? Like at this point, you've done all the type annotation.
Hmm.
What's the benefit for you to stay in Python in this piece of code? Well, maybe the library ecosystem. Maybe I don't know. I
I
don't
think
know.
that's mostly it. Is Python has all the packages,
Yeah,
and a lot of them. I mean, it's got 240 libraries in the standard library. So throwing that all away and trying to recreate the real multiple times in Rust would be a pain.
yeah,
But yeah, I know. I've been very torn about the whole type hinting thing in
yeah,
Python. Um, it is really useful if a lot of the engineers on your team come from like a C++ background or a Rust background. It helps them get into the code quicker.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it looks as nice.
Oh no,
So
it makes make my eyes bleed. But maybe it's just because I'm this old guy and I'm so used to like vanilla Python. Maybe it's just that I
well,
need to adapt. But for me, it's a glorified unit test. We moved from your test modules directly into the code to make it easy to test, uh, and add a little bit of nice automation so you don't have to write some of the tests. But for me, it's
hmm,
just it adds so much cognitive load that can be. And what I like to do is choosing good names. And I think when
hmm,
you choose good names and you do what we used to call Pythonic code, uh, the needs for type annotation is for me it's less appealing. So
yeah, I think the only argument I've seen that I really like in the two code bases I've seen it used is the ones that have lots of abstract base classes where it makes it really
yeah,
hard to tell what the object is.
yeah,
And the other one I had was I had a package that I had to interface with called Squish. And what Squish would do is it inject into a C++ Qt app and basically into the Python runtime. And so it would have all this stuff that you didn't know was actually there, but you could use it in your
right,
Python code. And typing that stuff out was really helpful because it could actually overwrite like bool and int and some other stuff, and it'd make a code act weird if you didn't know what it was doing. And then in those cases, I could actually see typing being helpful,
yeah,
just because you're like, "What the heck is going on here?" But
yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
know, I know what you're saying because exactly how I felt when the typing module was first added. I'm like, "What do we need this for?" Um, it has been helpful to me in the past. I'm still not sure about it, so I'm not going to completely diss it. But I'm also like, I really like the plain stuff, and most of my books only show regular Python without the type
yeah.
hints.
Same. And but like for example, in my current project, I plugged Pyrite.
Hmm.
So Pyrite is, it does type checking, but it works on plain Python as well. It does a little bit of inference, and it uses the typing that was shipped into the standard lib or some libs, and
Hmm.
it does catch some issues.
Yep.
And so that's cool. I mean, uh, maybe there is a middle ground where you hide your type annotation somewhere, and because you can do that, you can provide all your type annotation info in a separate file. So maybe
Hmm.
that's a good way to do it. So when people open your code, they don't cry because it's like it looks like another language. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I wish there was a better way to do it though.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's switch topics and talk about why you decided to write a book about Python. Because I know you've had a book out there. I think you've had a couple of different editions of it as well.
Yeah, I wrote 5 books. So some of them are in French,
Okay.
so they're not really known. And it's the French market is very small, like because most people now
Hmm.
in France when they buy books, it's in English. But back when I
Yep.
started, it was a big deal for people to have a book in French. So I wrote a
Mhm.
book about Python in French. It was one of the first books in French.
Mhm.
So so the motivation for me to write Python was to get better at Python. To write a
Yep.
Python book was to get better at it.
Yep.
Because, well, I mean, you've been there. When you write a book, you try not to say crap, right? You want to make
Yes.
sure that, so you have to investigate and get all the way there to understand exactly what you're talking about, and
Mhm.
that's really take you to the stage where you have to master the topic you're talking about.
Yes.
So, and for me, the goal was uh, to write the book I would want to read and understand.
Mhm.
So that was the main
Yep.
motivation.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I did it too. Was
Yeah,
this is the book I wanted when I started programming.
yeah, exactly, exactly. But now, I mean, the market is saturated. There are so many books in so many topics. So
Yes.
it's and the it changed. Like, I think people are more into micro content now. Like, uh,
Mhm.
the only incentive I have to buy a book now is if I have like a long flight and I can focus on a topic for a long time. You have the book
Yeah.
in the hand. But other than that, I think people are more into micro content. So
Yeah. There are a couple of niche topics I've seen that I think a lot of people can get value from a book. Like some of the Pandas books I've seen are really good because they actually have a whole collection, and you don't have to go across 10 different websites and find mediocre to really high quality examples when you could just
yeah,
get a book of high quality examples.
yeah, that
But
makes sense.
I agree, it's
And
kind of
for
painful.
I like LinkedIn Learning for this. Uh, because when you find good content on LinkedIn, like I don't know,
Hmm.
some guy talking about AI or whatever,
Yeah.
well, then you can follow that guy, and you have you're gonna have like all the course he made or she made on the topic,
Hmm.
and if it's good quality, you're gonna have a great series of content there. I'm taking LinkedIn Learning as an example, but there are many different platforms that do this.
Hmm.
The idea of following one person because they produce great content is a good idea, I think.
Yep.
And when they do smaller content, it's out there more often.
Yeah.
Like so, I don't want to wait 2 years to get your next book, right? I want
Hmm.
your small blog post and your stuff, I guess.
Yeah. Totally get it. Yeah. That's why I do a lot of my content as, even tweets. A lot of people get a lot of value out of my tweets, which
Yeah, yeah.
which seems silly to me. I'm like, they're what, 280 characters at most? But
Yeah, but it's they're directly connected to your train of thoughts. So that's awesome. I mean,
yeah, I agree. It just seems weird to me. That's not where I thought I'd be. I'm like, I'm writing books, but I think I get more. I think I have way more followers and way more interactions with Twitter folk than I do with my book reader folk.
yeah.
So, can you tell us about any lessons you've learned from writing a book or updating a book that you'd like to share?
Um, yeah, so I think the main lesson is don't worry too much about the table of content and push
Okay.
back when the editor really wants you to provide a table of content that is set in stone. This is
Mm-hmm.
not possible. The content will evolve as you write it. And
True.
the biggest frustration I have with books, by the time I finish it, I want to start again. Because if I
Mm-hmm.
go back to the first stuff I've written for the book, I found them crappy. I want to rewrite them, and
Yeah.
it's a cycle that never ends. So you have to stop and say, okay, I'm gonna stop. It's never going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And the other stuff also is to be ready to get bad feedback from some random folks here and there. When I wrote my first book, it was a good book. I had good feedback, but some
Mm-hmm.
people were like, I don't know. Sometimes you get a few nasty comments about what you did, and I took it personally, and
Yeah.
that didn't feel good. And so you have to learn that when you write books, you're exposed, and you have to be ready about that. When you're exposed,
Mm-hmm.
you get you have to make sure you don't get sad because I don't know. John from whatever place said your book is a piece of crap. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I have to be really careful when I go look at Amazon reviews of my books. I'm like,
oh hell no, yeah,
don't look at the negative ones. If I look at any of them, it's only the positive ones because then
oh yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And research tend to prove that book that are have like a mix of negative and positive comment on Amazon are the one that sell better than the one that have a 100% positive comment, because it's always um, how can I say that, it feels fake if you have
Mm-hmm.
a 5 star for everything.
Yeah.
And the marketing of like editors now, they are focusing on making the perfect Amazon reviews for you,
Mm-hmm.
so it's all fake.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, hell no, I'm not reading Amazon comments anymore.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, if you get those, or sometimes you'll get someone on social media who's like, I don't know, they just don't like you for some reason.
Yeah,
You have to realize sometimes people don't like you, and it's okay to block them.
yeah.
So,
One thing I loved about writing books is like 2 years after I wrote a book, I get a random ping by someone. Hey, I
mm-hmm.
loved your book. I became an engineer because I loved it, and I discovered Python. Or hey, thank you for writing this book. Like personal pingbacks like that on like
Yeah.
my email. That's gold. Like I'm like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I did this exactly for that reason, and that guy over there in that country found my book useful, and
Mm-hmm.
that's gold.
I totally agree. So, if anyone's listening to this today or in the future, say thank you to the authors and the content creators and the people who do open source work because complimenting them and thanking them makes them feel so nice and
Oh
makes
yeah,
it all worth it.
oh yeah. It's all about our ego, right? just
A little
just kidding,
bit.
just kidding.
It's more about knowing that somebody's actually reading it because you're like throwing this stuff out into the void and you don't really know what people think of it.
Yeah, yeah, true, true.
All right. Well, I want to just thank you so much for taking the time to come be on the Python show and share all of your great knowledge. It's really good to hang out with you and just chat about all these things.
Well, thanks a lot for having me. It's always a pleasure interacting with you, Mike. So thanks for this.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully, we can do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
The Python Show.